stem and leaf right there. I will tell you that anytime you work on graphing where it's important that you keep things in order with the columns, it is a good idea to either have students, or you even, using graph paper, or another method, if we find some in here, is line paper. If you just take line paper and turn it sideways like that, you give students lines to work with to make sure that they keep them the way they need to be, especially on a stem and leaf plot. If they'll just turn it in landscape mode, then you have the line to use to start out with this bar, but then as you put the leaf pieces on there, they can just make sure they only put one number in between each line. Okay, this can also be helpful if you're going to have them do dot plots, because you can make each space represent maybe 2 or 1 depending on how much space is in your data. So if you don't have the graph paper handy when you get ready to have them do something like this, just have them turn this paper sideways. This would also work on a box and whisker plot. Most of them have line paper, so you can use it in this mode right here. And if everyone's using it in that mode, then it works out well when you start trying to grade it. Okay, so there's the stem and leaf plot. Make sure it looks something like that. Then from the stem and leaf plot, you can go to the ordered stem and leaf plot, and that just means you put them in order. And now that would be something that I would probably only do for myself, just because not only do I like to see how many A's, B's, C's, D's, and so on in a set of data, I also kind of like to see where in the A range were they, where in the B range were they. And if you put them in order, that'll stand out a little more clearly. And it's not too bad from right here. But here we go. You start out the same way, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. Then take each leaf component and put it in order. So in the 50s, we only have a 1. In the 60s, just put all these numbers in order. So we're going to have a 1, a 5, 2 6s, and then 2 9s. And so on. And then you just keep doing that. And again, I try to make sure that I'm keeping things in line vertically on this plot as well. If you pay attention to that, it ends up giving you a nice histogram or bar graph look if you turn it up the other way. So there we go. There's your ordered stem and leaf plot. All right, questions on any of these? Any of these that we've done so far, they really don't take any calculating. It's just a way of arranging your data in a nice visual. Okay. Then moving to the next page, we have histograms and bar graphs. Now let me talk a little bit about histograms and bar graphs. There is a distinction on when you would want to use one versus the other. Okay, bar graphs is the first one. I know I don't have them in that order, but bar graphs I would suggest using when you have categories of information. It's not, you couldn't attach a number line to it. Okay, so like color of M&Ms, like we have here, red, blue, green, brown. You couldn't attach a number line because they're categories that don't have numerical value to them. You could put years if you wanted on a bar graph, although years could just as easily be a histogram. So you will see some blur. So you have to look at your data and say, is it clearly categorical? Meaning that you couldn't put a number line with it. If it's clearly categorical, then don't use a histogram. Use a bar graph. If there's a blur between the two, then you just decide based on the data that you have what you think best suits your need. Okay. Histogram is when you have ranges. So normally your data will be in integral form like you have here. The number of pets at home, they either have like 0 to 1, 1 to 2. Now I know you couldn't have 1.5 pets, right? But if your intervals were bigger, let's say you have from 0 to 3 pets, from 4 to 6 pets, something like that, then definitely you want to go with a histogram. A histogram also implies that there's some blurring in there. That just because we say that the number of pets at home is 0 to 1, then your next interval is 1 to 2. Okay, so there's some blurring of that line. So if we say that somebody has 1 pet at home, is that really going to be under the 10 or on the 4? There's some blurring in those intervals, giving you the idea that it's a continuum. So if somebody said that how many people have 1 pet at home, would you say it was 10 or 4? Well, it's probably going to be, depending on who you poll, there's going to be some blurring on that line a little bit. Okay, so on a histogram, the bars touch, implying that it's not distinct, staunch categories where there's not kind of some blurred areas, some gray zone in there. And then you almost always will see frequencies as your label for the other side. Can that change? Yes, it could be dollar amounts. It could be a variety of things, but normally it is frequency because it's come off of a frequency table. Okay, so let's just practice drawing a histogram and drawing a bar graph. On a histogram, you have to make sure that those vertical rectangles or bars are touching together, they're adjacent. On the bar graph, when you draw that one, make sure it's distinct bars that do not come together. Okay? So first we're going to do a histogram. And this is usually when you have intervals rather than categories, and you have continuous data. So as I start on drawing this, we're only going to, it's kind of like drawing a graph, like a Cartesian coordinate plane, but you stay in the first quadrant, so you don't need a bunch of extra on these sides when you draw these kinds of graphs, but there is an indicator of where the origin would have been. And then I'm going to indicate that it's one directional in its progression with an arrow just on those ends. And then don't shortchange yourself on the labeling. Make sure you clearly label the scale. That's probably one of the biggest areas of abusing statistics that I ever see is people shortchange themselves when they label these scales. So make sure you clearly label them and make sure you take the time to label them correctly. Okay, so down here we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And then we're going to tell the reader what those represent. Those represent number of pets. So not only do you want to represent each increment or interval down through there, you then want to put a title for that axis. Then we're going to come over to this one. On this one, I'm going to go labeling it by ones just so that I can have some accuracy here. But I need to go up pretty high because if you look at the data, the highest value you see is 10. So you need to go a little past 10. Depending on how big you write, you may label every one of those tick marks, or you may only label every one. You just kind of have to decide on your handwriting what lets you end up with a neat graph. And that. And then label what this is. These are frequencies.